It's happening. Yesterday, I turned in a 65,000 word draft to one of my ghostwriting clients. I also read through the draft of a 20,000 word book that I had finished last week for another client, gave it a little polish and sent that on to that client. And it was about 8 o'clock at night, and I was looking at my calendar for today, and I saw that I have one client left with the deadline at the end of this month. And it's already like completely outlined and has close to 10,000 words written, and it's a very short book. And I had scheduled myself to start working on that today, and I just thought, you know what? I'm seeing a lot of suddenly open space in my calendar. I don't have to, I'm not under a crunch anymore. I think the hell that I have been in, that I have put myself into over the last couple of months with my freelance work is finally over. And I decided that I had a very intense weekend. I've had a very intense last month, let's just put it that way. And I decided to take today, which is Tuesday, tomorrow, completely away from client work and try to get my head back into my own projects. And so that starts with Sandstorm, which is the stand-in title, because I don't have a real title yet, for the mystery novel that I finished a very, very rough draft of for NaNoWriMo last year. And it's been on my mind a lot. The last bit of work I did on it, which I will link that vlog up below, I had a pretty big breakthrough. I made a timeline, like a backstory timeline, going back, and it spans decades, over what was going on in these characters' lives back then that all led them up to these few days that they spend together in this house. And it was enormously helpful. And the first thing I did was I ran some errands this morning and kind of like in my head panicked and felt overwhelmed because I didn't know where to start because I have been away from this story for so long. And then I decided, okay, step one, first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna print that rough draft. And the reason I printed it was, one, I know that at some point in this process, I want to just read through it on paper, and I want to take my pens and mark it up and write out ideas of things I want to get rid of, things I want to change, things I want to add, etc. I do better with that step of the kind of revision process if it's on paper instead of on the screen. But I'm not starting that today. The real reason I printed it out today is because I just needed to actually see it and hold it in my hands and remind myself, I have a draft of this book. It is a very bad, very rough draft, but I do have a draft of it, and that gave me enough of a sense of, okay, the story exists. I can figure out what to do with it next, that I could, kind of get my overwhelmed feeling under control and sit down and come up with a plan. Next, I just kind of stared at my Scrivener document and felt overwhelmed. I mentioned this before, but I really want to work on this book as like my main Camp Nano project. I think that's kind of fitting since I wrote the rough draft during NaNoWriMo last year, and April is a nice month for me schedule-wise. I have one ghostwriting client and a few book coach clients, which is a very, very manageable schedule for me, so I'm going to have the time to dedicate to this project. And I would like to, by April 1st, I would like to be writing like the real first draft in earnest. I don't know if I will actually finish it for Camp Nano because I'm aiming for like 80, maybe 90,000 words. It's a bit longer, but that's going to be the goal. So I started to think to myself, okay, where in the next couple of weeks, what do I need to do to be prepared to start Camp Nano? And so what I did was, after I printed it out, I took a look at the timeline I had made for myself, and I read through it and once again felt a little bit overwhelmed, but also grateful to my past self for working out all the stuff I worked out. I talked about this in a previous vlog, but what really helped was that once I had that timeline, I went back and I highlighted what I was calling linchpin moments in the past. What I meant by that was big moments that impacted all of the characters in their past, that I can, when I am writing a scene set in the present, but I am working in some of their backstory, I can use those moments to help the reader tie all of their backstories together. So, for example, the victim of, this is a murder mystery, so the victim that you know is dead from the beginning of the book is an author. And she has published multiple books, but there was the publication of one in particular that is very important to the backstory. And when I was working through that and I wrote, this is when that book came out this year, then I looked through all my other characters and saw where they were in their backstories and what was happening. And I found ways to relay that to the publication of this book because in some way, however big or small, it impacted all of them. I hope that makes sense. So that was super helpful. And I decided that what's going to help me get my head back in this book, because I've had a break from it, and just kind of wrap my head around this and make sure I have a good grasp of all of these characters and this story again, is I'm actually going to do something that I will admit is a step in the snowflake method, if you've ever used that method before, that I always skipped. And that is writing a summary of the story from every character's point of view. I've just never had the patience for it, I'll admit it. And it's such a useful thing to do. And instead, it's not going to be exactly a summary of the book from beginning to end from this character's point of view. It's going to be a summary of their backstory leading up to the book and then through the end of the book and where I want them to be. So that is something I'm going to start working on today, and then I'm going to spend some time on tomorrow. I went into my Scrivener document and I created character sheets. Some of the characters I'm going to combine because their backstories are so tied together that it just makes sense to summarize them together. And I think that's going to help me really get my head back in it, and it's also going to be a good resource for me to use as I, hopefully in April, if I'm drafting and I'm feeling like, oh, this scene doesn't feel right, or what was it this person went through again, I'll be able to just reference their character sheet real quick and remind myself of, the important beats of their backstory and how it's affecting what they're doing in the book in the present. I've mentioned before that in Asana, which is what I use to organize my calendar, I really like using the subtasks. And so the next step was I went in and created subtasks for what I called outlining the book, which is basically going to be me going through that rough draft with my pen and marking things out and taking notes on what I want to change. I don't think I'm actually going to create another brand new chapter by chapter outline for this book. I think that I'm hoping that I will just be able to use the super rough draft that I wrote, write in the changes that I want to make, and then use that as the outline for the draft that I will be writing come April 1st. That is the plan right now, and we will see how that goes. But that is not the only Camp Nano project that I want to work on. So I think I also mentioned this a few vlogs ago, but as I was just completely crushed under a pile of ghostwriting work, my brain does what all writer brains do, and that is it gave me a shiny new idea that I am very excited about. And I started a document for that. This was several weeks ago, and I rambled a bunch of stuff in it. It came with the setting first, a setting that I absolutely love. And I went back and looked at that Scrivener document this morning, and I had done even more work on it than I realized. I have a cast of characters with summaries, and I can see all of them very clearly, and just lots of little ideas that I can just see this book. I can see this book. And what I didn't talk about then, but I'm going to talk about now, is that the way I'm approaching this book is going to be very similar to how my co-author Kirsten and I wrote the Secrets of Topsy series, because that series is a little bit different. It's not exactly like a novel. In fact, the very early version of it and our early concept of it was more like a series of connected short stories and little extra kind of snippets and vignettes. And that made the brainstorming process so much fun because we weren't really focused on piecing together a plot. We were just like, the whole concept started with the idea of a town. In fact, I'm going to share some of the documents that Kirsten and I were working on. You can see we called it Sidevale. We didn't come up with the town name Topsy until the book sold. And we called it Sidevale because when we sold it, we pitched it as Welcome to Night Vale meets Sideways Stories from Wayside School. So we were just calling it Sidevale. And we had this spreadsheet where you could see we would just brain dump all of these ideas once we came up with this quirky town, Sidevale, later Topsy, and we were just spitballing all of the things that could happen in this town, the different little locations, and what made it such a quirky, weird town. And then we came up with the cast of characters that lived in it, and it was just like endless possibilities of little short stories and ideas that we wanted to explore. And that's how I want to approach this new middle grade book, which I actually have a title for. I am in love with this title. I am not going to share it yet. We'll just call it W for now because this is the acronym for the title. So our approach to this outline was a little bit different than outlining a regular novel. We had a chapter which was going to be like a short story from the point of view of a specific character, what we called a short, which was like a little vignette, a legend, or like a really short form piece about the town of Sidevale itself. News, which was like a community news update. These ended up all being in the form of the school's Gazette, which was the school newspaper. Notifications, like special instructions or warnings from the principal or the town council. And fragments, which were just brief teasers. I think they ended up just being at the beginning of the book and at the end of each book. So when we outlined this together, we labeled them, according to our little key up here. And we would write down if it was a chapter, whose point of view is it going to be from? And as you can see, not between every chapter, but between most chapters, we would include some kind of short or a news clip or something like that. So as you can see here, a cafeteria menu was an idea for one of the shorts. There were notifications from the town council. This one was about the tides. That was one of the first things we wrote. It was super fun. And with the Gazette, the way we ended up going is that every news little piece that was written in the Gazette was about a developing story that came to a resolution by the end. So in this case, in the first book, it was about these mysterious crabs, black crabs that appeared on the beach. And there is a little twist ending with those at the end that I will not spoil for you in case you haven't read the book because it is quite delightful and disgusting. So once Kirsten and I had that kind of outline set up, that we knew we were going to mix up chapters with little short stories with legends and little Gazette clips and things like that. It was like the easiest draft ever to write because we were both just exploding with ideas. We weren't really trying to piece together a novel. It was all just so loosely connected. And the fun part was, we knew that we wanted to aim for around 30,000 words, which is really short, but we had so many ideas that we could just tuck them away for future books because we planned this to be a series. So honestly, by the time we finished writing a draft of book 1, we had a pretty good outline for book 2 and we had decent pitches for 3 more books to follow. We could have gone on with this series forever. We just had so many ideas. And part of what happened next was once the series sold, our editor, a big part of the first round of revisions was to really make it read more like a novel, which the published version does much more so than our very first draft did. And the way we did that was we had picked even though you get chapters from lots of different kids' points of view, each book has one kid that you focus on mostly, one kid that would get 5 of the short stories, and there was an arc there. And then it was just a matter of going into the other kids' short stories and making sure that parts of that overall plot were kind of present in those stories as well. That's kind of what I want to do with this middle grade project. But I want to I don't want to just think of it as a collection of short stories. I do have actually a mystery plot that I already have planned. I'm not sure exactly how it all unfolds, but I know how I want it to end, which I think is a good place to start with a mystery. And yeah, I think my goal for Camp Nano for this middle grade book is just going to come up with the loose kind of outline that Kirsten and I came up with for that very first Topsy book, where I just have a little summary of every chapter and legend and other little vignette that I'm going to put in between and make sure there's a little bit of an arc there. It's a little bit of a different process than the way I outline just a regular novel. And I think that the fact that it's so different from what I normally do, and especially so different from this mystery book, is going to make it almost like a nice little break, you know? I'm hoping that when I feel like I need a break from the mystery book during Camp Nano, I can let that well refill while I switch over and have some fun playing around in this middle grade world. So we'll see how that goes. I worked on my character sheets for a little bit and then just decided out of nowhere that I needed to make a bacon and raclette frittata. You know, one big enough to feed an army. So yeah, I spent the rest of the afternoon kind of doing that and then reading. And of course, one last thing I'm doing to get my head back into the mystery novel writing mindset is reading mysteries. So I'm finally reading The Maid, which I bought from Nowhere Bookshop back when I went to San Antonio a few weeks ago, and then it just like sat next to my bed forever because I was too busy writing to read. Started reading it, very much enjoying it so far. And as for audiobooks, I'm reading The Golden Couple, which is by Greer Hendricks and Sarah Buchanan. They've written a few books together. The first one was The Wife Between Us, which, I think I'm remembering this right, was like one of my favorite midpoint twists in a mystery novel, honestly, since Gone Girl. It was great. I really enjoyed it. So they're kind of like automatic buys for me, and I'm, let's see, a couple of hours into this one, and it's great so far. Really enjoying it, so yeah. Okay, so it is now Wednesday, and we are at the end of Lisa's live stream. We've got one sprint to go. I have made some really good progress writing out these character sheets. Right now, I've spent most of this morning working on the description of, without being too spoilery, the victim around whom the story is revolving, and also one other very important character who may or may not be the villain. And I've worked out a lot of knots, figured out some important things that I needed to figure out. And I was looking at my list of characters and thinking about, because I've been like hopping around in all of them and adding little things to the other characters as I develop this one character sheet. And I think, I don't know what made me think of it. I don't know what triggered the idea, but I just, as we were talking in that last, in between sprints, I kind of realized I think I have two characters who I need to cut. And this is always a really hard decision to make because I have a draft of this book already, and cutting two characters, one of whom was a POV, he got many POV scenes, that really kind of shakes things up, except here's why I think this is the right decision. It actually doesn't shake things up that much. From the beginning, I have had kind of this feeling that these two characters, these two guys, are outliers. They don't really belong in the group. And the way I have explained the reason why they're here, honestly, if I'm just really being very brutally honest with myself, it feels a little too manufactured. It feels a little forced. I worked them in. I was trying to go back to my original, just when I was first writing this, what made me include them, and it was because these two guys, they're young, they're cousins, and they're business partners, which is always a recipe for disaster, and there is a conflict between them that is a particularly meaty one that I really enjoyed writing about. I had a lot of fun in that one character's point of view, the arc he went through that led to him confronting the other character by the climax of the book. And thematically, what they go through ties into the theme of this book. And that was why I kept convincing myself that it belonged. But I think the truth of it is, if I can lift these two guys out and the plot can still completely exist without them, and if I don't need them, then I don't need them. And when we're talking about a book with so many POVs, I don't know. I think when I think about taking them out, as much as I love their story and their arc, and I look at the characters who remain, there is no removing any of them. They all play a crucial role, whether they realize it or not, in why this woman died and in what happens next. And these guys just didn't. So as I'm saying this, I think I'm making the decision that I'm gonna have to cut these two characters, which honestly, I can save them and their juicy conflict that I enjoyed writing about for another book, which I will do. And my overall feeling when I think about doing this is relief. And that is kind of how I work through and get in touch with what I call my writer gut when it comes to making decisions like this. I really think that all of us have these gut feelings. There's stuff, like I said, with these two characters. I loved writing the confrontation scene between them. I loved building the tension between them, this issue that was driving them apart, and I loved writing the explosion that resulted at the end. That's a darling that I didn't want to kill. But if my overall feeling when I look at the book as a whole is relief at the thought of taking them out and just focusing on what really is the core group who are truly all interconnected, then that's my gut telling me that this is the right decision. So this is a big deal. And I think the story is going to be a lot tighter because of this decision. So, and also, you know what? It's just going to be a little bit easier on me because it's two less characters to worry about and how they tie into everything that's going on. Okay, so that was the big revelation of the day. This feels like actually a really big step forward. I think after I get over my sadness at losing that fun confrontation scene, this is gonna make things seem a lot clearer and a lot more, a lot just easier to approach and to keep in my head. It's just so many characters and so many things happened leading up to all of this that it's nice to have those two backstories taken out. Anyway, so that's where I am right now. I've got 15 minutes left on this, so I'm just gonna keep going with these character sheets as long as I can, and then it'll be time for a break. So I was listening to, my audiobook, and in the back of my head kind of turning over this decision, trying to decide whether I really want to cut these characters or not. And it's funny, today on the live stream we were talking about beta readers and how we find them and things like that, and I was thinking about my critique partners who I've had, I mean, we've read each other's books for years, and I'm very fortunate in that they are excellent at what they do, very kind and encouraging and supportive, and also very honest, which is probably the most key aspect of a good beta reader. And it's hard to offer someone criticism of their book when you know how hard it is to write a book. But my beta readers are very good at being honest with what needs to change with my projects. And I was imagining the rough draft that I wrote and just like a clean version of it with all of the characters. And I could just hear all of my beta readers, all three of them, the ones I use the most often, telling me, yeah, these two characters, those two guys, I don't really see how they fit into the story. The more I think about it, the more I realize I forced them in because I liked their story, but it belongs in another book. So those guys are gone. They're going to be in another book. And I really do think this is going to make drafting this and planning from here on out a lot easier, because all the other characters are so much more connected. There is no way to pull one of them out without unraveling the entire thing. So that's the big revelation for today. I am very excited about this. I'm so happy that I took these 2 days to get back into this book. I think I'm going to eat some more frittata, first of all, because I still have a ton of it left. And then I might spend this afternoon playing with my middle grade idea a little bit. But yeah, I'm feeling good about Camp Nano. We've got 2 weeks to go. I've got some time to get things prepared and ready to start writing that draft. So are you doing Camp Nano? If you are, let me know in the comments below. What are you working on? Oh my gosh, guys, I'm so happy that this deadline hell crunch is over. It feels really good to be just back on a normal schedule and working on my own stuff again. So I hope things are going well for you too, and I will see you next week with hopefully more than one video.